Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sustainable House Day. We are so glad that you could join us today for our series of free sessions with homeowners and experts. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on stolen lands of many First Nations peoples. I am speaking to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we would like to acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. If you feel like it, feel free to share which Aboriginal land you're watching from in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Before the day begins, we'd like to tell you a little about Sustainable House Day and Renew. Sustainable House Day is a national event that gives you access to Australia's most sustainable homes. You can visit sustainablehouseday.com to see detailed house profiles and tour videos for the 130 homes open online this year, and to interact with those homeowners through the comments section of the site. Sustainable House Day is organised by Renew, a not-for-profit that inspires, enables and advocates for people living sustainably in their homes and communities. You can find out more about us at renew.org.au. Before we start, I'd like to thank our sponsors and council partners who have made this day possible. A few housekeeping notes. All of our sessions today will last 55 minutes and all will be accessible through the same link that you clicked on to get here. You can ask questions at any point during these sessions by using Zoom's Q&A function, which you can find in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We ask that you please use the Q&A and not the chat function if you have questions for anyone in our sessions today. We have live closed captioning for this event. To use it, click on Live Custom Live Streaming Service in the upper left-hand corner of your screen and click View Stream to see an automated captioning in the browser window. Thank you again for joining us. We hope today's sessions are informative and inspiring. Now we'll start our first session of the day on finding a sustainable architect or builder. This session will be emceed by our Sanctuary magazine editor, Anna Cumming.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Erin. I'm very excited to be kickstarting this first session of Sustainable House Day 2021. My name's Anna Cumming and I'll be your MC for the session focusing on getting started finding a sustainable builder or architect. I'm speaking today from the traditional country of the Dja Dja Wurrung people in central Victoria, and I acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So as Erin said, I'm the editor of Sanctuary Modern Green Homes magazine, published by Renew, the organiser of Sustainable House Day. I have a long-standing interest in sustainable, energy-efficient and comfortable homes that tread lightly on the earth. And I really love being part of the mission to inspire and educate people about the design strategies, materials and systems available to achieve them. Even once you've armed yourself with lots of information and are ready to go with the build or renovation of your dream green home though, it can be hard to know how to take the first step. I often get inquiries from readers asking how to find a sustainability-minded designer or builder to work with. And it's certainly true that finding knowledgeable professionals can make a huge difference to the success of your project. Today, we're going to explore this topic with our 5 panelists, 3 homeowners, a builder and an architect. Firstly, we have Simon Clark of Sustainable Homes Melbourne, a builder who specialises in transforming rundown old homes into beautiful, comfortable, sustainable homes, including 2 opening for SHD this year. Hi, Simon.
Oh, hello, Anna.
Hi, tell us about your project.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. It's fantastic to be here this morning. So we have 2 projects in Sustainable House Day 2021, one being McDonald Street in Northcote, a neat little alteration and addition, restoring an old California bungalow there, and it's fully electric home. And the other one that we have is the Clifton Hill townhouses, which we completed a few years ago now in 2017, and that's back in the day where we were building new homes, and we no longer are.
It was a great little project. We had it in Sanctuary.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you very much. Nice to have you here.
Pleasure.
Next is Louise Martin, who's nearing the end of a sustainable renovation and extension to her family's 1916 house in a heritage conservation area in Sydney. Hi, Lassity.
Hi everyone, and thanks for having me. I'd like to just quickly acknowledge the Gadigal and Wongal peoples of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land from where I'm joining today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present. So yes, our house is called Róisín Dubh, for those who are not sure how to pronounce it. It's an Irish word that means black rose. My partner is Irish, and our house was built over 100 years ago in the inner west of Sydney, in an area that's subject to heritage constraints, which has been an interesting challenge for us as we are trying to do all these funky, sustainable things, which is not what our council is used to. We're currently completing a renovation and rear addition, which is due to complete at the end of October, although I've got some doubts about that exact timing. We started our reno journey for the same reasons as many people would, who are interested in this webinar would be considering. So we had been living in the UK for a decade, moved back to Sydney with our kids and could not believe how cold we were inside in winter, constantly going outside to a beautiful day and, be surprised because the house was so cold. So our overall project objectives are to improve energy efficiency, reduce reliance on active heating and cooling, transition away from gas, improve thermal comfort, better management of water and waste management. So those are some of the things that we're trying to achieve. And there's more details in our house profile. The design has been rated as 8.3 stars on Natas, so I'm hoping that the experience
whether I can set up the computer.
I'm hoping that that's gives us a much better experience at the end. So in terms of the talk today, I almost feel that I can talk more about what not to do in terms of finding a sustainable builder or architect. We did find that a real challenge, especially in Sydney. And we ended up with a lovely architect without previous experience in sustainable builds. And then we had to patch in a sustainability assessor to do some thermal modelling. And then another third party architect as well to get our requirements right before going to tender and finding our builder. So that was quite a costly way of going about it. And probably if it were possible to find someone with end-to-end experience, that would be a better outcome. We found our builder because they'd previously built a passive house, but they've never done what we're aiming to do, which is a retrofit that isn't a passive house. So they had an interest in being involved, but again, hadn't actually completed a piece of work like this before. So yes, I've got, happy to discuss, further as we proceed through the webinar, but it's certainly an interesting journey once you take those first steps towards trying to achieve a sustainable build. And there does seem to be a bit more experience outside of the Sydney metropolitan area, in Melbourne and Canberra and those zones of Sydney that have more challenging winter temperatures.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. Thanks, Lassity. Looking forward to hearing more about it. Now, next up, we have Matthew Saxon and his partner, Alicia Johar, who worked with sustainable architect Sid2 and Element Builders in Perth to create their 8.2 star rated family home, which was featured in Sanctuary last year as well. Hi, Matthew and Alicia, take it away.
Good morning. So our journey towards a sustainable home started many years ago. Both of us independently had a very strong interest in sustainable design and had a desire for a sustainable home. Mine was always a theoretical interest, but luckily my partner has a much more practical interest in these things and really drived making that happen. And part of that was the very protracted process of thinking about exactly what we wanted to do and how to make that come to pass. A very, very big part of that is selecting an appropriate sustainable architect. I think we have some insight to offer in that area.
Great, looking forward to hearing some more. And finally, we have Marc Bernstein-Hussmann of Melbourne Design Studios. He's both architect and homeowner, having just completed his own home, a passive house built from prefabricated cross-laminated timber on a really very difficult, tiny wedge-shaped site in Coburg, Melbourne, right on the train line. It's an amazing result. Hi, Marc, how are you going?
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Anna. You've said it all. Nothing else to add, right? Look, I'm an architect, so I kind of sit on both sides of the fence. I come to it from the professional side, but I've also just done my own house, so I've experienced the pains at either end of the spectrum. Let's put it that way. I'm passionate about sustainability, sustainable design. In Melbourne Design Studios, we've won lots of awards for our work in that regard. We've done the 10-star challenge and won that twice, and the Architects Institute sustainability medals and all those sorts of things. So we've been dealing with this for a long time. But of course, when you apply it to your own home, it kind of gives some interesting findings sometimes. So yes, the house that we've built is on a very challenging site next to a train line. We've used lots of unconventional materials, the CLT, wood fiber insulation, triple glazed windows. It's a passive house, so it's certified passive house, currently undergoing certification actually, rated at 8.4 stars Natas, I think, from memory. Got to double check that.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
In my memory too. Certainly 8 point something.
Yeah, that's right. So we've also included, because it is our own house and we've got a professional interest in this, we've included quite a number of data measuring points. So there's little sensors within the facade build-up, so we can measure temperature and moisture. Because one of the big issues I find with high performance houses that we're seeing is condensation, which isn't really such a big subject in the industry yet, but will be over the coming years, because the more high performance houses we build, the more issues with condensations we'll get. And so it'll be interesting to see how the house actually performs over the coming years.
You've only just moved in, haven't you?
That's right, yeah. So we moved in this year in May, and some of you might have actually might think you know me because you've seen us on Grand Designs. So our journey has been on Grand Designs Australia, last episode of the last season. So yeah, you can always follow that up if you want to.
Great, thanks, Marc. It's nice to have you here.
Thanks.
Okay, so that's our panel for today, and I'm going to be facilitating a discussion with them with your questions and answers. So please start submitting your questions for any of our panelists or all of them via the Q&A function on Zoom at the bottom of your screen. I'm just going to get started with one of my own questions though, and I would like to know why you think it's important to work with sustainable builders and designers on your project. Who'd like to go first?
I'm happy to go. I think what people miss out on if they don't go with someone who's experienced and expertise in this area, who specialises in this area, is balancing the different features and cost. Okay, so you can go to any old architect and you can say, I want an 8-star house, or builder, and say, I want an 8-star house, or I want these passive design features. But what you're missing out on with that real knowledge and expertise is balancing the different options to get the optimal result for the lowest cost. Because anybody can spend lots and lots and lots of money and build a highly efficient luxury home.
Thanks, Alicia. Marc, you had something to add?
Yeah, look, I agree, it's the costing, but also a lot of sustainable design actually goes back into the design. Well, that's what the word says. So things like, I don't know, passive shading, for example. So you've got eaves that can shade the house in summer and that allow the sun to come in winter. Those sorts of things, they don't cost anything extra, but they're important to get right from the word go. So if you have someone who's got the experience and who understands the differences of passive house versus passive solar design and what all that means, and each of these measures how much efficiency does that actually give you, then they will be able to really help you and guide you and find, like you were saying before, find the most cost efficient and the best solution for you. So I think it's super important. Always get someone who's got the right experience.
I think,
Simon?
Adding on to Marc from a builder's perspective, certainly we're not really reinventing the wheel, but in some ways we are. Oftentimes we're dealing with materials perhaps, but more probably technology like heat pumps and grey water systems, etc., that typical builders aren't used to dealing with. And I know early days for us, there was some challenges that we faced with some of those items. So I think having that experience now, 7 years or so under our belt has really held us in good stead. We know what to look for with the complications that can arise from just unique, not necessarily unique, but whether it's recycled bricks that we have to deal with, or recycled timbers, or anything like that. They come with some degree of or consequence, I guess, whether it's just a challenge to obtain a resource or apply on site.
So what I'm hearing generally from everybody seems to be that it's the experience of the sustainable builder or the architect that's important, and that if it's somebody who is passionate about sustainability and also has experience in that area, then that streamlines the process, keeps the costs down, and so forth. Would that be a fair summary?
Yeah, you've got to have the passion as well.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Definitely.
Simon, I have a question from Jeremy for you. Just wondering why you're no longer doing new homes. Is it a business decision, or was it for sustainability reasons? Just quickly.
Yeah, I saw that question there. All the above, really. We employ our team of carpenters, and they really enjoy the renovations and extension side of things. We sort of see them as craftsmen, so they get a lot more fulfillment from that, and it makes sense from a business perspective for us because it's just what we ended up being better at. And also sustainability, we recognise as a big hole that we've got all this existing housing stock that performs really poorly, and this throwaway culture.
It's still a great resource, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And we've got to get rid of this throwaway culture, this fast fashion. It's in homes, it's in everything. We've got to upgrade the homes that we've got. So that's where we saw the opportunity.
Well, you get into the whole embodied energy discussion going on from there. I mean, if you've got existing materials and existing building shell that you can utilize, that's the most sustainable thing I personally believe to start off with. If you can utilize that, by all means utilize it, but then of course try and make it really, really well performing and really, really good.
Yeah, it certainly helped us recently with supply chain issues. We've already got half a frame there, so we don't have to worry about massive amounts of timber getting delivered to site.
Absolutely. So how do you actually go about finding a sustainable architect and or a builder? Are there listings through ArchiCentre, word of mouth? What's the secret? Maybe Matthew and Alicia, you could,
I guess, okay.
Lassity as well.
We're in Perth. There's not really a lot of choice. But I have to say we had not heard of our architect until, right before we chose him. There's been ones that have been around for a very long time that everybody knew. It's going to Sustainable House Days.
I'm fine, thanks.
Oops. It's going to Sustainable House Days and getting to know the different houses. So we found that, so there was the Green Swing in Eastwick Park, and the owners there did another build, and I found out from somebody that I knew that Sid had done that build. And they also knew Sid because he worked with them at a university. So he actually lectures on sustainable architecture and eco-effective architecture. So that piqued my interest. And then, it was meeting him and vetting him and getting the feel that we could work together, that we had similar goals, that he was willing, that he valued what we wanted out of it as much as we did. So it was, it was a process of talking to the ones that we'd heard of and getting that feel for who we could work with the best, I think.
Yes, there's no substitute for legwork, I think, when it comes to finding a sustainable architect. There's no handy little guidebook that's got all the numbers listed where you can find them all up and get straight into pre-qual.
Yeah, that's a good point, Matthew. And before I had to you, Lassity, to hear what your experience, I'd just like to put a little plug in for Sanctuary, because what I often tell people who ask this question is to browse through some back issues of the magazine, because we feature as wide a range of sustainable designers as we can around the country. So go and find something you like in your area and contact them. Lassity, how did you go about it?
Well, it was tricky. We did look in Sanctuary actually to see if we could find anyone who's advertising. Looked on Facebook, looked to see what other projects have been completed nearby. What we did find is that the ones who kind of stick out the most and are the obvious and easiest to find are often ones who've been doing passive house, but then they can be, I mean, passive house sounds really great, but we didn't feel it was right for our project because we were trying to make our existing house more energy efficient, and we didn't think it would be cost effective to try and get it to a passive house standard. So that was a little bit of a challenge for us, trying to find a sustainable architect and builder. I can't say that we ended up, necessarily succeeding. Hopefully it's about, as more builders and architects become interested in the space, more skilled up, it will become easier. And I just want to sort of make the point as well, back to the previous question, that it's also about the whole team, because it's not just one builder that you're working with, it's all of their subcontractors and trades that they would normally have a comfortable working relationship with, and the same with the architect. So for example, our architect was on board, but the structural engineer that she normally uses didn't really understand what we were trying to achieve and kept putting lots of steel that was exposed to the outside in our design and things like that. So it just took quite a bit of rework to try and get those drawings to where we needed them to be. And I guess really the reality is that in our experience, that a sustainable house takes everyone working together in quite a different way to perhaps what they might be used to. I mean, builders usually work on lots of different projects. They don't always or only work on sustainable projects, depending on who you find. So it might be that the builder is committed to your waste management plan, but their subcontractors might not be aware of what you've actually agreed. And it's about how to try and get that, the objectives of the project, I suppose, across that whole team. Yeah, so that would probably be my key feedback. But I just think ask people who've renovated what their experience has been. And I think, I mean, someone's asked a question and about how to find people and what you would ask them, and I would say ask for their most recent references. Our builders had never blower door tested any of their previous builds apart from a passive house, so they actually had no idea what they normally achieve in terms of air tightness or energy efficiency, just on a normal build. And so in some ways it was quite unknown for them, trying to figure out how to build something that was more airtight but not passive house and not leaky. And it was sort of like, how do they fine tune their practices away from what they normally do, but without ending up with a passive house at the end? Like, what are the actual, how do they actually need to build it? How do they get those drawings and realize them from being a drawing to being a finished building that meets the project objectives?
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say from my knowledge and experience that while it's great if you can find a builder and an architect who are already steeped in sustainability, it's, if you can't, or you don't want to go down that path for whatever reason, that it's also a very worthwhile exercise just to find someone who's prepared to come to the party with you on that. And even if they've never done it before, it's probably about the communication between you and them and or everyone else involved, as you say, Lassity, the contractors. And if people are prepared to, everyone's got to start somewhere, right? So it's about the relationship probably as much as anything else, as much as the experience, or one can be a substitute for the other.
Absolutely. I would agree with that 100% actually. And on our project, that was actually an issue. So that's something else I would say to people is make sure that you've written into your contract how you want communication to work, because with us being the main drivers of the sustainability principles in the project and having to sort of remind people of what we were actually trying to achieve, it sort of disrupted the relationship that the builder was expecting, where they mainly just looked to the architect for direction, but then the architect would be talking to us about how the sustainability stuff would work. And then the builder didn't want to have to listen to us as well as the architect. So initially in the beginning, it's a bit better now. That was quite tricky because they ended up missing some things that the architect didn't think to look for, but that we had, put into our requirements as being important. So they forgot to put the wall wrap on the framed walls, and they had to retrofit that, and just a few things like that. became a problem because of that communication. So I think if we want to do a sustainable project, you have to make sure that your builder is open to working with you and talking to you, as well as talking to the other people on the team, and having that really good relationship end to end would be quite critical to a successful outcome.
How would you do, so another question that's come through is, how do you do that? How do you ensure that your architect or designer and builder is really motivated and passionate about sustainability, i.e. that they walk the talk? And what questions would you ask them? Now maybe from Matthew and Alicia and Lassity, you could answer that exact question, and perhaps Marc and Simon, you could talk about what you love it when your clients ask you, or what you wish they'd ask you.
I think we've had a completely different journey to Lassity, because we've been lucky enough to find not only an architect but a builder who are very experienced and basically only do sustainable houses now.
How did you find your builder, guys?
Through our architect.
Through
so
Sid, yeah.
With his prior experience. So he worked with many different builders, and he'd had some bad experiences as well with trying to work with builders. And then along his career, he's obviously found a like-minded builder, to the extent that this builder, I'm not sure if his house has been in Renew. I think it has been. It's definitely been in Sustainable House Day. But, the builder has gotten our architect to design his house, and has built his own 7.7 star house.
Great.
So it just meant that we had a builder and an architect who were of the same mind, who had experience with the same materials, who understood what we were trying to do and why, and understood our cost restraints. And honestly, we had a really easy journey, a great relationship with for them. And they were contractors. We didn't have to do any of that. And we did not have to do a very expensive project management relationship either. So we managed it, but because we were just dealing with the architect and the builder, and they were of the same mind.
Just getting BBC guide.
Yeah, so I guess, for people out there, if you get the impression that it's a very hard journey, it may be, but if you can find that builder and architect who work really well with you, it doesn't have to be at all.
And so what questions would be good to ask to just check that you are really on the same page before you launch into this, potentially quite expensive and long-term relationship with your professionals? What do you think you should ask, Simon?
That's a good question. I think there's got to be an element of trust. I mean, you've got to, it's difficult. Like I can imagine Lassity's situation, being a builder, and you're taking direction from the architect and the owner. That's like the builder's worst nightmare, to be honest, because there's conflicting views and all of the rest. And you do one thing and someone else, the other party doesn't want you to do that. So it's a challenging situation. So I think, which I know Marc will agree on this one, documentation, it's like number one. If you've got the documentation right and everybody can agree on it, of course that can develop to some degree along the journey, but documentation and everyone on the same page, I suppose, contractually, is number one. Like you can't really beat that. And of course you've got to get along personally, because as you say, it's a long-term relationship.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And I would also suggest that people perhaps interview their builders really carefully and make sure that you're meeting not just the lovely, friendly person who's coming to tender and price the job, but ask to meet the person who's going to be project managing the work as well. Because I do think it's essential that that people can work together constructively. And I think I would go so far as saying that you cannot, well, you can have a successful outcome without a constructive working relationship, but it's painful and it's hard. It would be much easier if the relationship was on a good footing from the beginning. So it probably is important, because everyone's different, just to make sure that you do find that person that you can work with well. And the key is that you need to be prepared to work with each other. I mean, it's a long haul piece of work. We've been going since January. So there has to be an acknowledgement that you will actually need to talk to each other, and that you'll have to find the time to actually work through things in order to get the best outcome. So I would absolutely make sure that that is in the contract, and make sure that there's some realistic time expectations so the builder can allow for enough time. We have been really careful about never giving conflicting instructions. Obviously, the architect is providing instructions to the builder. It's more about that communication and collaboration, which is sort of hard to describe, but is actually really important. But I would also suggest asking for very recent references. So maybe the last 2 builds. So one of the things we found with our builder was they've grown really fast. They're running 5 teams now. And the references that we got were from longer ago when they weren't quite so big. And I think then they had more time to sort of work with the owners. Can I just call out, someone's asked a question about insulation actually, and do you mind if I just answer that quickly, because I want to share a cautionary tale.
Go ahead.
So Peter has asked about pump-in insulation for Sydney in a double brick house. We have put insul block in, I just wanted to say, which is like polystyrene cubes that you pump into the walls. Unfortunately, we've got sash windows, which we had spent a fair bit of money making more airtight and renovating before we did the insulation. And when we did the insul block, it completely gummed up our sash windows. So they were no longer operable. So I just wanted to call that out as being a possible risk that people need to be aware of. The pump-in people said they'd never heard of that happening before. Everyone said they'd never heard of it happening before. It was us. We were just lucky. But I think, I know it's been used a lot in Canberra and in other places. The insul block's probably quite good. But if you have a traditional house with sash windows, be aware that it's actually really common for sash windows to not have the sashes enclosed in like a box, a sealed box. That apparently happens on high-end houses in like the Cairns type build. Ours are like the poor end of town sash windows.
So you mean that the gap, the cavity that the sash drops down into or raises up into,
where the sash weights hang,
where
is
the weights
open to the cavity brick walls.
I see.
So when the insul block went in, it just filled up that cavity, and then the sash weights couldn't move, which meant the walls couldn't slide up and down.
Oh, that's unfortunate for you.
It's important for people to know this can happen. If you're thinking, so insul block sounds like a great product, and we really wanted to retrofit and fix up our existing sash windows because it's more sustainable. But just wanted
there
to
are some pitfalls. Yeah,
there can be pitfalls. We've had to actually cut our sash cords and fit spiral balances to get around it, because other than removing the pump in, that was the only solution.
Okay.
I guess some questions to ask. We didn't really ask questions, but I guess in our explorations, we were given some answers that really convinced us. Mm-hmm. So I guess one thing is an architect that can actually do the Natas assessment themselves and play around with different features. It's someone someone who offers you what their latest builds are. So in terms of our architect, he actually said, look, I've done this house here, this house here, this house here, really close to you, go and have a look on the outside. And we also went and looked at some of his houses during Sustainable House Day as well. So we had a good idea of his previous experience and what kind of results he was getting. In some of the, if you go on a Sustainable House Day visit, you might be able to actually ask the owner, how's it performing? What kind of problems did they have, etc. Because we knew our architect through other people and mutual acquaintances and stuff, we could actually hear feedback of, how his previous work has gone and how the relationships went with those clients. I guess it was also, I think it's good if you lay out what you want out of the build, if you're very clear about what your goals are. And you may have some preconceptions, which we did, about the best way to do things. But, someone who's willing to actually show that they've thought about it more and they've got more experience, you can come back to you and say, actually, no, that's not actually the best approach. I would recommend this, this, and this. So it's someone who's willing to also bring their own knowledge and to question your assumptions as well, not just someone who's just doing what you're telling them, appears to be willing to do what you're telling them to do, but has something to give back to you. Yeah.
Marc, you've been very quiet for a while. Have you got anything to add to this discussion we're having right now?
Look, trust and relationship and quality obviously are the most important things, but they are hard to assess when you ask questions. So my top 5 questions: ask your architect about the difference between passive house and passive solar design, because if they can explain that to you, at least you've got a good starting point, and you know they actually know something, right? They've got the technical knowledge.
That's a really good tip.
Yeah, one of the issues in the industry is everyone uses the word sustainability. It's very, very overused, but there's a lot of babbling without actual sort of knowledge and expertise and experience behind. So that's important. Similarly, ask about condensation and how they would address that issue in a sustainable, well-insulated home. Again, if they can answer that, you're on a good way. Ask about airtightness and what's their approach to that and how they feel about that. I mean, obviously, all these questions depend a bit where you are in Australia, because we've got so many different climates. So different things are important in different climates. But any sustainable architects should know all these things so they can do the right things. I would ask about what sort of materials they use in their designs. Are they open to using unconventional things? Like we use a lot of wood fiber insulation because it's breathable, it's a natural material. I believe it's a great thing to do. Ask questions around those things. And of course about previous projects. What type of projects have they done? Are they similar to what you want to do? I mean, if you have, like Lassity, if you have an old building that you're renovating, it's a completely different skill set to a new home. And some architects, like we do both, we can do both. But I know a lot of councils that we're dealing with. We've got a passive house project at the moment. It's not certified, but it's sort of using passive house principles. And it's with an existing heritage rated home at the front. And for councils, they say, well, you got to preserve the heritage. They don't understand that if we don't preserve the planet, there's no point preserving the heritage. And I hope at some stage we come to councils understanding that. But so it's those experiences that the architect needs to have, I believe, to be able to help you in the best possible way.
I think those are really great questions, actually. Yeah. That would be really helpful. Yeah,
I think that's a terrific list as well, Marc. I just had someone put a comment in the chat asking us to explain our acronyms. I'm very sorry about that. Natas is the National Home Energy Rating Scheme. It's a government scheme. There's a handful of different accredited software programs that rate that, and that's the scheme by which you get the 8.2 stars rating for your home, or whatever your home rates at. So thanks for the prompt to explain ourselves a little bit better for people just getting started. So somebody else has asked, can you please share about how you went about formulating a budget for your project and finding the resources to fund it? And I mean, it's not specifically how do you find a sustainable architect or builder question, but it's definitely a getting started question. So love to hear your thoughts.
Budget is super important for most people. One of the most important things, of course. To me, budget is sort of less to do with sustainability and more to do with quality. So I can spend $1,200 a square meter for a building. I can spend $12,000 a square meter for a building, right? So it's got a huge range, and you need to identify roughly with your budget where you want to be sitting, but then you get your architect to help you, and your architect should be able to tell you what that means for you. If that's your budget, what does it mean? What do you actually get for that, right? And then you can work through that, and then you know where you sit on the quality range, and then you can fine tune everything else towards that.
How did you go about it, Lassity?
Sorry, I was just looking at the chat. What was the question?
How did you go about formulating the budget for your project and finding the resources to fund it?
Oh, look, I can only just be honest here and say budget is just a nightmare, really, because as a homeowner, you don't really want to spend a whole ton of money, like a small fortune, you know, as if you were a millionaire. But the reality is, especially in Sydney, it's just super expensive to do anything. And, you know, we're almost at the end of our journey. If I were at the beginning, and also in terms of what I've learned about how you can, what sort of things you can do to make an existing house more comfortable, I probably would have seriously considered not starting and just working with what we already had in some smaller way. But anyway, too late now. But look, really, in the beginning, we didn't want to share our budget with our architect because we were afraid that she would design to that budget. And that was really our sort of ceiling of like all the money that we had. So we just gave her our requirements. I hope that she would come back with something that would actually, be be less than that. And I think as a homeowner, you're probably always a bit scared to tell people how much money you've got to spend on something, because then you think, well, they're just going to spend that, and that's not what you really want. But then if you don't share your budget, then it can be really difficult for the architect or designer to design something inside that ceiling. So I would probably say, think about how much you'd be realistic about construction costs. There are some calculators online that let you see per square meterage roughly what it costs to do stuff. So use that to get an idea of what it actually costs possibly to do what you're thinking, and then think about how much you actually would like to spend, and then make sure you share that with your architect so that you can make sure that your design comes close to that. For us, COVID has been a little bit of a curveball because things have become more expensive as we've gone through. But that's just how it is, but that would probably be the key thing I would share.
I agree. Sharing that budget is super important. Being honest about money from both ends. Your architect needs to be honest about it, and the homeowner needs to be honest about it, because only then you have a chance of actually achieving that budget, right? I mean, there's so many unforeseens anyway in this industry. Last year, construction prices went up massively that no one ever could foresee, and it just happened. But if you at least get those parameters right, and a good architect will always advise you put a contingency sum aside as well. So if you come to me and tell me, well, my budget is 500,000, I will tell you, well, from those 500,000, you take off the architect fees, then you take off at least 10 to 15% contingency, and you put that in an extra sort of separate pocket, and then you arrive at a construction budget. So if you tell me your budget is 500,000, I will respond back and say, well, your construction budget is probably 300,000 by the time you account for landscaping and everything else as well. And so that conversation is super important to have with the architect.
Yeah, everyone go to Marc to build a house. That's what I would say. But can I just also
Marc to design it, Simon to build it.
Exactly. Can I just add to that and say as well, that's also where it's really important that your architect has an idea about sustainable stuff, and it's not all new to them. So I'll give you an example. We wanted to be water sustainable, so we wanted to put in this underground water tank. We had a hydraulic engineer advise on the design, and we were basically told that the cost would be X for the water tank, and then an equivalent amount to have for the excavation to have it fitted. In reality, it's probably been 4 times that cost, because of all sorts of other things that the water tank has driven, which the architect just wasn't expecting, because it's the first time they've put in an underground water tank. So that's just an example. It wasn't a mistake. It was just, inexperience. And so the more you add in these different ways of working that people haven't tried before, the more likely you are to come across costs that people didn't anticipate because they just didn't know about that piece, what would be driven by that piece of work.
I guess from our point of view, one of the first things that our architect said to us is, that it's more sustainable to renovate what you've got than to build a new house. And we accepted that, but the indications were, looking at costings and stuff, is that it would cost almost as much to renovate what we had as it was to build a new house. And then with getting a new house, we had the chance to basically start from scratch and get the best result that we could, rather than have to compromise on what we could achieve with what we had. So we decided to build a new house, and we looked at things like what were the new houses in our area worth versus how much we'd already paid for the house, and how much we had to spend, how much mortgage we could possibly sustain. I guess we sort of took the approach of paying our architect as we went with our sort of cash flow that we had, but that we had a certain budget for total construction, as well as making compromises on some things that we pushed out and paid for ourselves afterwards, so that it wouldn't have to be part of our mortgage, so that we paid with money that we had as we went along. I think, and we were very upfront.
Yeah, so I think partly what Alicia's talking about here is thinking about what your scope is. So, sometimes a build scope is complete, absolutely everything. That's quite common. So Everything, every single bolt, every single thing part, every part of the house, all the landscaping, everything. That's not the approach we took. We sort of had a look at the scope and excluded certain things, which involved in the end, both of us, and particularly me, doing a lot of work after the house was actually finished, doing mad things like building decks. And one bit of solid advice, if you're going to do the painting, I strongly suggest that you exclude the ceilings. Don't do the ceilings.
We didn't do the ceilings ourselves, and that was from the advice of our builder. That was the sort of quality and trust that we had with our builder. He said, look, yeah, do the painting, but let me do the ceilings for you. And 100% right. So we were just doing things like painting or paying for the solar panels to go on, doing the deck, and we did the gardens ourselves, etc. So basically, the cost that we've got on the website includes demolition, it includes our architect's fees, it includes the major works that we did afterwards, but our actual build cost was a fixed price and it was much less than that. So I guess, it's how you manage those risks as you go along. And unfortunately, we did this 2 years ago, so we fortunately did not run into the huge COVID problems that are going on at the moment. But in the normal scheme of things, that kind of thing worked for us.
Yeah, we painted the ceilings of our renovation when our tiny children, at night after our tiny children were in bed. And
stop it, Annie, you're making me backwards.
I think I'd probably endorse your advice there. Sorry, Simon, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to reiterate being open and honest with the architect or builder. We design and build only, and we wouldn't want to take on somebody that we can't meet their budget. And to be honest, we get a budget and we want to start off with a wish list and work back. So we price it early every time, not every time, but 9 times out of 10, the wish list has grown just a little bit throughout that early stage, and then we're able to rein it back and get more realistic. So yeah, I can't make that more explicit, be open and honest.
I've heard many recommendations from professionals that I'm in touch with as editor of Sanctuary, that it's a really great idea when you're working with an architect or a designer to get a builder on board with the process early on. That's a way to keep that you can keep costs down and also just increase the buy-in of everybody in the team, I guess. So that's something to consider as well if you're launching into your own project as a possibility. And another thing I wanted to just talk about was the Natas rating, which I mentioned before, the energy rating, the star rating, got many names. It's something that new builds and big major renovations need to achieve a certain minimum in order to get permission to go ahead. But it's also a really great design tool. And so you could talk to, what I could add to maybe number 6 to Marc's list of questions. You could ask your designer or architect whether they are comfortable with getting the design rated early in the process and make changes to the design according to what the rating, the rating comes back as.
Even better choose an architect who's got in-house expertise in being able to do the rating, and that can be Natas or PHPP, doesn't really matter. Any energy modeling should be integrated into the design process. It's not,
and even iteratively.
Can I just say something there just really quickly? I think that's really excellent advice, but I just want to point out that unfortunately New South Wales is a bit of an outlier, and NatHERS isn't required in New South Wales. They use a system called Basics. We elected to get our house rated under NatHERS because it's a more comprehensive and more useful system, I thought, for measuring how efficient our house would be in the end. So you can get a specialist, assessor to come in Sydney. There's plenty of people that do it, and they can give you a NatHERS rating, and a NatHERS certificate is not actually a requirement. But I think that's really excellent advice, because we actually did get our design rated before we submitted our DA, and we made some changes obviously as an outcome of that, so that we knew going into the council application process what we would achieve with that design. And then when the council pushed back and took out some of the things that we wanted to do, like they said, we couldn't do reverse brick veneer for whatever reason, it didn't make any sense. we then got the changes that we had to make re-rated to make sure that we were confident on the outcome that we would achieve. So that is really important. Somebody in the chat asked a question as well about the difference between blower door test, passive house certification, and Natas. I don't know if you spotted that.
Yeah, I was getting to that.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. But before we touch on that one, Lassity, I just want to also point out to people who may just be starting out in this whole area that the Natas, or the energy rating, is a rating of the design. It's not a rating of the built house. So you need to be aware that even if you come up with a design, you and your designer come up between you with a design that rates very highly and should result in a really high performing house. It's important to make sure that it's built to that design. And because if the builder cuts corners, you can easily end up with a house that's doesn't perform as well as the design indicates. And we actually had a question about this from somebody in the chat. How do you ensure the builder builds to the energy rating that has been designed as recommended by the Green Building Council of Australia's design and as built rating? And can you write that into the building contract? Simon, got any thoughts on that? On writing that kind of thing into a contract? Or how do you make sure that you get what you have designed?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I believe the Australian Building Codes Board are considering at some point in time in the future of making it a mandatory.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah, wouldn't it? So, yeah, I think it's a good idea to write into the building contract. I don't know what. Yeah, I mean, I'm not in law, but I don't know how that would work if it was to not achieve that rating. But I'll leave that up to the legal side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But we had one home, I think only one home ever, actually rate after the fact, and that was to get the Bank Australia 7-star. It rated 6.9, and the as built was set just like 7.1 or something. Mm-hmm. So that was obviously a really good result. And yeah, it would certainly be a good exercise for a homeowner to do, for sure. And a blower door test, of course, too. And yeah, Marc?
Yeah. I think from my point of view, one of the steps is if you have an architect or designer who's experienced in sustainable design, and you engage them to do contract administration, so they are retained throughout the whole project and are there while it's being constructed on site. Part of their role is to go to site and chat to the builder and make sure it's actually all good. And if it's not, spot that and you have a discussion with whoever's the builder and make sure it is being rectified. So I think that adds a lot of value having that. It's an expensive service often because there's a lot of time that goes into it, but it does add a lot of value because you have some quality control, independent quality control. The other thing is, of course, if you go to a rating system like the Passive House and you go to certification, that gives you peace of mind because you know a passive house, a certified passive house will always perform to the level that it's been designed to. And that's one of the biggest differences, in my view, between a Natas rating and the PHPP, a passive house rating.
That's because there's actually post-build testing and certification for a passive house. There's obviously the blower door testing that happens throughout. So you usually do two airtightness tests throughout. You need to document the building process. So you need to really have photographic evidence of everything that you do and be able to show that it meets the standard. So there's a lot of little steps, and then in the end you can obtain your certification. Yes, I'm just going to jump in and explain for people who might not know. A blower door test is a test where a company comes and puts a great big fan into your doorway, and it's essentially a measure. It's a way to test by pressurizing and then depressurizing the whole building how airtight it is. And that's important for sustainability. It's very important for meeting the passive house standard, but it's also just important for a high performing house of any kind.
It is being introduced into the building code finally, so so that's a good thing.
I've certainly heard of people writing in the requirement for a blower door test that meets a certain level into their building contracts, and also I believe that I have heard anecdotally, at least, of people writing in the requirement for checking of the installation of insulation before plasterboard goes on. So
I would agree with that a lot.
And maybe thermal imaging cameras too. And you know
we wrote that into our contract actually. We were going to do a blower door test and also use thermal imaging So I think that's a useful way. It's one useful way of trying to measure, but I'd also agree with getting photos of insulation. That would be really important as well.
Yeah. So we're just about to run out of time, I'm afraid, everybody. I'm sure we could keep talking about this for another hour. We've just got like 1 minute more, maybe 1 or 2 minutes more. Does anybody have any final, what's your hot tip, hot piece of advice or pitfall to avoid for people looking to get started and find their dream team of professionals to work with?
I would just say everyone's so opinionated. If you're doing something sustainable, you're doing something a bit different, which means everyone's a bit of an outlier, which is actually great. But you need to find the right team to work with to make sure that you get the right outcome. That would be my top tip.
So shop around.
Do your research properly, have a look at the previous projects, be honest with your budget. And maybe if you can try and arrange like a lot of architects have a little offering, like a pre-design stage, or at least a half an hour phone call with someone where you can get a good feel about what they do and if they are a good match, because that's the most important thing. Like
take full advantage of that from many different options. Eh?
Yeah. I think I've already given my hot tip earlier. No, there's no substitute for legwork in your target.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Yeah, don't just make the decision based on money or I think people or name, like you really have to get to know the person and know that they are on board with your ideas. I think people could be just sort of looking at names, seeing numbers in papers and stuff without actually meeting the people and really, understanding where they're coming from and that they understand where you're coming from.
Thank you. Yep. Simon, last word.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I'll add to that. It's about a relationship. Use the resources like Sanctuary, Renew have. There's Builds Declare Australia as well, which I'm a founder of. I know Marc's involved with Architects Declare Australia. They're great resources. And I would just say at the time that we're currently in, the construction industry is overloaded with work. So be patient. I think a lot of people may have to be patient and do the old social media stalk. Understand your builder or your architect, know who they are, and you're going to be in a much better position to engage them when the time comes.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. That's all we've got time for in this session. Thank you, Simon, Lassity, Matthew, Alicia, and Marc, for sharing your time and expertise this morning, especially you guys in Perth. It's a very early start for you. Thank you also to all our attendees for tuning into the Sustainable House Day session and for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. I was a bit overwhelmed with the number, and they were great questions too. If you haven't already, you can check out our panelists' projects as well as all the other participating homes at sustainablehouseday.com. And if you do have questions that we weren't able to answer today, you can comment on the online house profiles and ask your questions of the homeowners and designers and builders, in some cases, directly there. Thank you again, and please stick around for our upcoming sessions.